Hi, my name is Deanna Lindberg, and I'm an occupational therapist at Springboard Pediatric Therapy. We are a multidisciplinary practice that has OT, PT, and speech language pathology that works with kids from birth until early adulthood. This is our new Nuggets series where we talk with parents about common topics that people have questions about. Our February series is called Cozy Connections, and today is about mindful meltdown management. One thing to note before we start is that while I'm an occupational therapist, this presentation does not is not in lieu of medical advice. And if you're having difficulties beyond what this presentation discusses, please seek support, whether with you can call us for a consultation or speak with your own occupational therapist, parent coach, etc. So today we're going to talk about what are typical meltdowns, have a discussion of when meltdowns are likely, a little bit about the science behind a meltdown, guiding principles for meltdown management, and then how to move forward. There's a great psychologist, Daniel Siegel. He has a quote that these are survive moments, no questions about it. Opportunities, even gifts, because a survive moment is also a thrive moment, where the important, meaningful work of parenting takes place. When we talk about meltdowns, I think it's always important to remember this quote because they're going to happen. It is a part of typical development to have meltdowns. In some cases, you have more than the typical amount, which is really hard on all members of the family, parents, the child, siblings. But I always like to view them as a learning experience, something where we can collect information to be able to grow certain skills or to change the plan for next time and how we manage things. So I think it's important to talk about what is a typical meltdown. Meltdowns happen very commonly between the ages of 2 and 4. That's where the name terrible twos or three-nager comes into play. They can start even earlier, 18 months up until the age of 4. And during that age range, meltdowns are typically less than 15 minutes. That said, having meltdowns that are greater than 15 minutes do occur, typically not more than 3 times a week. They are considered atypical if they're lasting longer than 15 minutes, more than 3 times a week. If the meltdowns are significantly affecting safety, if they're impacting our function in everyday life, or if we're seeing a pattern of meltdowns over the age of 5. Having one every once in a while can happen. We can be tired. We can be angry, lonely, or tired. HALT. We talked about that in our last new nugget on connection and co-regulation. So this kind of gives you something that you can view if you feel like you need a little bit more support. I just talked about. Meltdowns are most likely to happen when we are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So HALT. That's a phrase we can keep in our head. They can happen when we're overstimulated or after periods of overstimulation. So if you went to a birthday party or after family events, anything that is a change in plan is typically causes some level of overstimulation or is harder to get through. So you can see them after those. Sometimes after holding it together, kids are able to work really hard throughout the day to meet those demands or expectations of everyday life, then can fall apart with you. That shows that they trust you and know that they're loved. But it can mean that there's something going on, that they're working harder throughout the day and then seeing it at home. And transition times are common times of meltdown when we're shifting from one activity to a next. Especially if it's not on their terms or in their way. When we talk about the science of meltdowns, I always like to think the parent-friendly version versus the super neuroscience version. Dan Siegel also talks about a fist being our brain. The knuckle part of our fist is the thinking part of our brain. The thumb that's tucked in is our emotional center of the brain. And then we have the animalistic part of the brain. When we go into our emotions kick in, a fight or flight response, we're really not using that thinking brain, and we are really using that animalistic part of our brain. That's when our body floods with stress hormones, our heart increases, muscles can tense. We're not able to reason logic or listen in those moments. That's why sometimes you can have a meltdown and you can have exactly what they were asking for and they're still crying or still having that meltdown because they're not able to process through that. This is survival instincts, and it means that the thinking part of their brain is really unavailable. Also think about when you've been overstressed. You had a busy day at work. Maybe you're hungry. Dinner is later than usual, and things are going on in your life, and you're more likely to hit that fight or flight state. It's always good to remember fight or flight is the opposite of rest and digest. So that sympathetic fight or flight state, we're not able to think, we're not able to reason. So using language is going to be really hard in those moments. We kind of want to think about how do we support and get through the moment and then move forward. A few guiding mantras for people. One is to put your own oxygen mask first. When I say that in terms of, it's really important that you support your regulation so you can support your child's. Sometimes going into overdrive, what do I do, can almost create an alarm sense in yourself, which then can elevate the other way. Other phrases are, when they go high, you go low. Thinking that in your head. When they're having that meltdown, it can be really easy to combat with yelling, you feeling that sense of adrenaline going through you. We talked a little bit about that last week in our what is co-regulation and co-dysregulation. But that mantra of when they go high, you go low. The other statement is low and slow. We're going to lower our voice, lower what we're asking, and really support that co-regulation in the moment to move forward. The first thing when a child is having a meltdown, I think about is safety. How can we make the sure that they're staying safe? So they're at home, moving items in the environment so it's safe. So if there's maybe scissors in the way, or if there's like big heavy balls or toys that could be dangerous, just gently moving them out of the way. While your child's upset, it can be tucked into a closet so they're not accessing them and likely to throw it. I always make a family plan. There can be a code word or code expectation for other kids. That means go to your room, go to a safe space. It can have something fun for them to do there while you're managing that meltdown. So I've had a family I once worked with, and we used the word pineapple. And Mom said, "Go look at your pineapple. Go get your pineapple box." They would go into another room. They had some activities they knew they could access from their pineapple box. So that way Mom was able to be present and manage the meltdown. And also, so there's not more onlookers, the more people present is really going to elevate the situation. You can move your child if needed. If we're not able to move the other children in the space, kind of safely removing them, it's going to elevate it for a second, but to a safe space so that way you can manage that moment. And like I said, that oxygen mask first, co-regulate. So when we think about co-regulation, we have a whole other YouTube that you can go back and look at this, but we want to think about how can we be regulated in that moment? That allows us to think and reason to the best of our ability, but it also gives that sense of calm to the child. Just like you feel elevated when your child's elevated, that's natural. It's because of mirror neurons that we talked about in our last presentation. If we feel calm, their brain can process the calm and support them into getting to calm. I know that's often counterintuitive, but it really, really works. That said, it's not an instantaneous, I'm calm, so they're calm, but we are more likely to get to the calm place from this co-regulation versus elevating. And that's when that power struggle, yelling matches come into play, and that just escalates and makes things last a lot longer. So things you can do to co-regulate is taking deep breaths yourself. often people will imitate that. Even whispering yourself, like I said, that low and slow, children are more likely to model your tone of voice. If you've ever whispered randomly while you're playing a game, often the person next to you starts to whisper. Proprioceptive input yourself. So you take having a gum, sucking Tic Tacs, muscle tenses, or a progressive muscle relaxation, just to give yourself proprioceptive input, which releases serotonin that keeps us calm. And keep your language simple during a meltdown. So simple acknowledgement statements. I know you're having a big feeling. I'm here to help when you're ready. Or can I give you a hug? You don't have to give a million different examples of things you could do. You can give one example or two examples that they can choose from. They don't have to choose. They likely won't be able to, but that shows I'm here, I'm with you, and I'm here to support you. Like to think about monitoring your body in these moments too. One thing to do is often to bring yourself to their level. When we're elevated and they're low, they're more likely to kind of perceive it as a threat. Again, that animal instinct part of them. Similarly, with our eye contact, try not to make direct eye contact in those moments. It can just elevate that situation, but still be looking at them. Don't be looking away. Don't ignore them. Making sure they feel seen and heard, and that you're with them without kind of like ready to fight them with direct eye contact. Also, keep your emotions slow. They're more likely to be elevated by things moving in the environment. Like I said, that environmental piece, if we need to remove them from the environment so they're able to settle out of it. But keep motion slow so they don't feel threatened. Things you can do in the environment when I have kids that are having meltdowns are to lower the lights, decrease sounds. There's headphones here, but probably wouldn't suggest headphones in those moments. But if there's TV playing or radio playing, maybe turn that off or put on simple music versus like a highly stimulating show. But that can help not elevate meltdown, and decreasing some visual stimulation. Maybe lowering the blinds if you're able to. Again, those TV moving fast stimulation, things like that, try to decrease that if possible. Strategies that can help during meltdowns. I will say when they're in that true fight or flight, it's almost nothing is going to break through. That said, there's this like cusp of a peak of a meltdown where they're almost in that elevation, or they're coming down off of that true fight or flight, call it like kind of like that yellow zone. This is where strategies are most likely to be absorbed. But offering cold water can stimulate the vagus nerve on the back of the throat. You could even offer, if they wanted to hold a cold ice pack or a cool ice pack between their hands. They don't want it. Again, not forcing these strategies on anyone. You could even add in sucking through a straw, because that sucking, that aspect helps to support regulation. Offer hugs, give extended hugs if they want to hug, 5 to 10 seconds, so they're getting that deep pressure input. It also allows them to feel connected with you. Now, if they're a child that doesn't like to be touched, hugging is not going to help in that situation. Offering snacks. This is more from if they happen to be hungry, that can be supportive. Also, that chewing piece, again, that the jaw is a really strong regulator, so chewing something can be helpful. And sometimes I even give chewing gum as a tip for older kids to support their regulation. Redirect attention to something visual. A common one, I'll just start playing a puzzle activity, or maybe pulling out some Play-Doh, something that they can visually focus on. So what that does is it stops that cycle of I'm frustrated in their brain, and allows them to focus on something different. Even looking at what's outside, playing I Spy, again, if they're available. If they are shooting you down with no, they're not quite there yet, you'll get there. Use humor, again, as long as that's not irritating them. That's where silly jokes, being silly yourself, if you get them to laugh, those endorphins really help that meltdown come through. Last one I like is like a change of location, suggesting a walk, offering to go to a different room. Sometimes when we stay in that room, we're in that state of stress, but changing a location can kind of take out those factors that are reminding them of why they were having that meltdown. Key thing after meltdown is, how are we moving forward? We were just in a state of fight or flight. When we're coming down off of it, going into reasoning of what happened, a lot of the times can just kind of trigger that meltdown. We really want to think about, how can we move forward? So move on to the next activity. Help yourself to regulate and not dwell on what occurred. This also helps not to create shame. You can reflect later of what kind of triggered it. Is, I wonder what we could do, or how could we break it down, depending on the child's level. 2-year-old's not really going to be able to process that. Maybe an older child is. That's where support of a therapist and where their level at can be really helpful. Also, modeling apologies can be really helpful. If you did raise your voice during a meltdown, modeling, "I'm sorry for raising my voice," is more likely to help that apology be reciprocated. There, two people can not handle things exactly perfectly, and children, when they see things modeled to them, are more likely to follow suit and not feel shame about making a mistake or having this behavior. A lot of times, most of the time, when child is having a meltdown or they've had meltdowns, it's out of their control. They switch in that fight or flight, and they feel really bad about what occurred. But then they almost have some mental self-talk, like, "I'm the bad kid. I always have meltdowns," and that can make even apologies or kind of that repair even harder for them. So modeling yourself, which encourages them to ultimately do the same of how to repair after that occurs. That said, like I said at the beginning, one of the most important things to remember about meltdowns is making that survive moment into a thrive moment. We can do this by collecting some data. Afterwards, reflect yourself in your notes app on your phone. And like to say, make sure that the child doesn't have access to this. So cautious about using journals or places that the child can get. But what came before? Maybe you're noticing a pattern. Maybe it's always around 11 o'clock, and they need a different type of snack. They're a little hungry in those moments. Maybe it's transitions, and then you can work with using strategies to make transitions more fun and engaging for that child, so they're not viewed as stressful, to decrease the meltdown. Your homework here, while it takes more time in reflection time, pays out in not having to manage a meltdown or as many throughout the day or the week. And always reflecting on what worked to support their regulation and what didn't. Coming back so that way you know what to use for next time. Also, after a meltdown, if you find any trends or anything, we have some other YouTube pages. This is where you can reach out to a parent coach, or a therapist or OT. How can we go back to our proactive regulation strategies? What are the hard points? How can we make them not as stressful, which we talked a little bit about in our last presentation, to support the skills that, because sometimes they might not have, can be a trigger for a bigger meltdown. And always making sure that you remind yourself it's about progress, not perfection. You're not going to go from having 10 meltdowns a day to none, maybe 10 to 7 consistently, using different strategies and with the right support. It's about that progress, and you're on that journey with your child. Now I'm going to stop the recording and see if there's any questions.